Hello and welcome to another episode of the Builders Podcast. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Anita Owens, an accomplished analytics engineer at Instabee, a company founded in 2022 after combining Budbee and Instabox, two leading last-mile delivery companies. With over 8 years of experience in data and analytics across industries such as logistics, e-commerce, financial services, and telecommunications, Anita brings a wealth of knowledge to our discussion. We'll explore her path, her role at Instabee, and her insights into the evolving field of data analytics. Anita, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. How's it going?
Yeah, thank you for bringing me on. Very, very happy to be here and very happy to talk about data.
Yeah, really nice to have you with us. But let's talk first, shall we? A little bit about your background. Tell us a bit about your journey before you entered the sphere of data analytics.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I'm actually from the US originally, living in Sweden. So my education and background was in sociology, in social work, and also law.
Cool.
So when I moved to Sweden, it's essentially your degrees don't really translate to the Swedish job market. So I really had to figure out like what to do with myself. Do I really want to go back to school to get an academic degree, which didn't sound very interesting to me. So I decided to enroll in a completely different program at Hacker Island in 2015. And that was when I studied digital data strategy. And at that point, during the course of my education, I was really trying to still figure out what I wanted to do with myself and how I could build a career here in Sweden. And it's really hard to predict the future, but I thought maybe the future would be in data. And so I kind of decided to go along that path and just teach myself kind of the skills I needed to work in a more technical facing role. I want to a career in the future, and that's where it all kind of started, and then just kind of compounded and got a really cool role starting out, and just kind of built on that knowledge and continued moving up in my career, and also working with data in different ways.
Super. And not a bad epiphany to have back then, right? So kind of, the future is data. But what was it? Was there like a turning point or an experience? What kind of initially sparked your interest in data specifically?
Well, I mean, I thought it was just a really cool thing to learn, actually. And for me, it was really about, I think initially it was really about, can I get a job with this?
What do I need to do to get a job, right?
What do I need to do to get a job? And I figured that, well, the more technical kind of skills that you could build, was something that I really just wanted to focus on. I figured that actually, in order to get a job, my language skills in Swedish were not that great. So I needed something to compensate for that. And so that's why I decided to, do more technical work, working with programming and data specifically. And back then, when I got my start, it was really all about data science was kind of just launched into like the lexicon, and people were talking about data science, and that's when it kind of kicked off. And but for me, it really was like just a deep interest in working with data, like what data can give you, what can it bring you, and that for me was like the focus and what I was really interested in, and I thought it was just fun as well at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, super. And we'll get into about talking a little bit about data, what it can do, what it can bring you. But you spoke also about studying sociology and law, and how in order to get work, you were moving in a new direction too. How do you is there a part of like the skills and everything you learned when studying those other subjects that are kind of transferable now to when you're working with data? Does it kind of impact your approach to kind of data analysis and engineering in any way?
It is actually quite interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about that as well. like the skills that I learned, particularly in law school, were actually quite relevant to what I'm doing. I used to review a lot of contracts, read a lot of briefs. And what you're looking for is all of the detail, that information, that kind of smoking gun. And what I do now currently is really the same. It's just a lot of detail, like making sure that you understand exactly like what is in this data. And so it's very similar. As long as you can think logically about something, and I think that's really transferable as well. And if you really have a mind to really pay attention to those tiny details, and you can think not only in like one way, you do have to think in other ways. And I think law school also teaches you to think not only about your case, but you also need to argue the opposing lawyer's case as well. Like they're going to poke holes in your argument. And it's the same with data. People are going to, question, like, how did you come with your numbers? How did you come up with this analysis, this recommendation? And you have to anticipate what type of arguments that business stakeholders are going to ask you, like why did you do this versus that, and why should I listen to you? Essentially, it's really is part persuasive role as well. So it's not just the kind of technical things that you have to do. You have to persuade people that, yes, the insights that I've found here are actually relevant for you. And this is why you should listen to me.
No, really, really well put. And you were speaking about kind of how, previous studies in other subjects are relevant, but you've also worked across various sectors, right? I mentioned logistics, e-commerce, financial services, and telecom. How have these experiences kind of shaped your approach to analytics as well? I mean, because each sector must have its kind of data priorities, right? Obviously, logistics with real-time data, financial services, more emphasis on security, I can imagine. So, how have all of these kind of shaped your approach?
Yeah, I think working in different industries has been quite a great experience because you really learn a lot. You have to learn a lot about the business and how the business works. And each business is very different. And so for me, it's been really about how can I continue building my skill set, and having the kind of the varied experiences really helps a lot because your stakeholders are going to be different. When I was working in financial services, most of my stakeholders were commercial. So commercial people, for instance. And now in logistics, I work with a lot of people who work in operations. So it's very different, but the skill set that you have about this is the data, how can you make sense of it, that stays the same. But now you have to take all of that knowledge, information, and translate it to different stakeholders in different domains. I think working in different areas and different businesses, industries, actually helps you become more well-rounded as a data professional. Because you can get quite stuck in one lane, and maybe that's fine for some people. Maybe they're happy to be in their lane and they're an expert, and that's perfectly fine. But I find that the more experience I get, the actually better as a data professional I get as well. There are kind of, you can argue both ways, some benefits, disadvantages, but I think the career itself can be so fast moving that in order to kind of keep up, you really do need to have these different experiences and working in different industries. As well.
No, it must have been really, really beneficial having worked across such different industries. But and you touched upon a particular challenge there and having to kind of translate it to different stakeholders. But are there any other kind of specific data challenges that you've encountered?
I kind of laugh about this because the data challenges have been the same everywhere I've worked. A lot of people don't understand data,
right?
Is what I find, and so what I have to do is to try to educate and explain What are the opportunities and also the limitations? People just see the word like AI and they just think it's like magic is going to happen. And we have
And
all
someone
this
just clicked their
data.
finger, right? And this happened. Nothing else happened, right?
And that we're going to be able to just plug in our database into ChatGPT and everything is going to make sense. It's like, no.
Yeah, you're like, I'm sorry, I sort of break it to you, but that's not how it works.
It really isn't. So that challenge has been around for a long time, and it will continue as well. People really don't understand data and also the limitations of it as well.
And how do you go about making then this data, as easily interpreted or interpretable as possible for these kind of end users, the stakeholders? What's your tip there?
Well, the first thing you would have to do is you have to meet people where they are. Some people can be more visual, and I feel like as humans, the more visual, the better.
Yeah.
So rather than maybe having like a wall of text where you explain everything, maybe a quick diagram, you can just do it like a quick Figma or some Miro board where you kind of explain in really simplistic kind of language, maybe some boxes and some circles and some lines that says this is actually how it works. And that helps a lot, trying to figure out where people are in their kind of understanding and try to make it as simple as possible for them. Is my thing. And people are usually quite visual as well. So try to make it as easy as possible, reduce their cognitive load, just do some simple diagrams. That is It's nothing very fancy.
Yeah, no, I speak for myself there as well, that I'm personally very kind of visual. I find it far easier to kind of understand diagrams, flowcharts, or whatever you want to call them, for sure. But talk to us also about some career milestones, some turning points that have been kind of significant for you. Any projects or breakthroughs that you're proud of?
Oh, wow. I think, like throughout my career, I think every time you level up is always a milestone. When I was working at Instacart, when I started, I was really just a very junior analyst. I didn't really know a whole lot and had not worked in a data team before. So that was my first experience. So I had to really learn a lot. And which I did. And then after a few years, I was able to, move into a senior role. And so now I'm the senior person and I'm helping the more kind of juniors on our team be able to be effective in their roles. That was definitely very cool. And also moving on to a new role as well, and a new challenge, because it's not easy landing some of these data roles, but it does help the more experience that you have, because then you have a lot of practical knowledge and experience that new employer can tap into. And then also moving more from an analyst role to analytical engineer. So for me, that was a really, for me, like really great part of my journey was being able to make that transition. After quite a few years as an analyst, you're always looking around trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah. So that was going to be my question as well. I was going to ask whether you'd kind of been more or like solely focused on the kind of engineer role in terms of like data engineer or analytics engineer. But it sounds like you've been also kind of working, not to say that they're completely like different sides, but you've been on the analyst side, like the data science, the kind of BI side as well, where they're analyzing the data that essentially the analytics engineer and all the data engineers are kind of preparing for them, right? Making analysis ready. So you've been on both sides, if we're to put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And I think it's a real benefit to having worked in a different type of data role. I tell people all the time as well, and I try to, mentor people who are trying to break into the field. And I say it's actually quite common to kind of change the type of data role that you have, because everyone, almost 99% of people I talk to, they're like, I want to be a data scientist.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like, if you actually knew what they do, you would not say that.
You're speaking from experience here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I try to like impress upon people. There's so many variations of working with data and data roles. And also like my role currently is fairly new role to the kind of data world. And it's really been enabled by the DBT labs, essentially having this kind of breakthrough tool that makes really building data models quite easy for
And talk
people.
to us a little bit about that specific role, the analytics engineer. What does this do? How does it differ to like the data engineer role, for example?
Yeah, the data engineer is more heavily on the technical side, where they're really building things, I would say, like in Python, for instance, or PySpark, whatever language that they're using. They're really focused more on setting up that they could be setting up a data infrastructure and then creating these kind of pipelines. Whereas since we are analytical engineers, we're really more business facing. So we're working with stakeholders to try to analyze, okay, their business needs, what data do they need to see? And we're trying to just make sure the data that we have in the database, can we piece this together in order to make sense for these stakeholders that need to take decisions on this data? And a lot of what we do is focus simply on SQL, and which is great because that means anyone on the team, and even if you're not an analytics engineer, you can be a data analyst, that you know some SQL. And it makes it easy for everyone to understand because SQL is very much, it kind of reads like English, essentially.
Yeah. And staying on the topic of roles, what does your ideal analytics team look like in terms of roles, in terms of skills and dynamics? How do you think the right team setup can kind of influence success?
Yeah, I think having a team that has various skill sets where you can actually cover the data needs of the business. So everything from, I mean, ideally, you want to have a data engineer that's mostly focused on creating those integrations where you can get data from one place, move it to the database, having analytical engineers that are more focused on, let's create these kind of data models, these data tables that our stakeholders need. And then you have, of course, you might have analysts or BI developers who will be helping build reports potentially. Also, like making sure that we have all of the visual tools that we need for the business stakeholders who are going to be kind of sucking that in. So I think also, and in the team I work now, we now kind of have that similar structure with now we have a data engineer and then an analytics engineer, and then we have our analysts who are also mostly BI developers. But also, ideally, you want someone who might be focused on also data literacy, increasing that kind of knowledge and sharing that knowledge internally with different stakeholders.
And what different tools are you using within your team, for example?
Well, we're very focused heavily on DBT as for the transformation. And we use Snowflake for our database and warehousing. And we have Tableau for reporting. And what we want to do, we're always experimenting with like new tools and thinking about like how can we do this in a better way, and also exploring different options for like the semantic layer, for instance. It has been something that's been on our roadmap that we want to implement fully, and also thinking about, should we think about the tooling for the reporting? We would like people to have more self-service analytics, and that's kind of been around for a very long time. It is really hard to do. But now there's just so many more tools out there that are focused on these areas, everything from semantic models to having self-service analytics. And so that's something we're also exploring fully, as well as kind of data cataloging and chat GPT for your data warehouse.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really interesting to kind of see, and we'll touch upon like, where it's headed later on, I think in this chat, but it's really interesting to kind of see what's, the possibilities that are coming about in specifically in different data warehouses. I mean, BigQuery being one that I work quite a lot in and we use here. The potential to kind of essentially write queries using natural language, right? Or kind of even later in different kind of dashboards, in these BI tools, Tableau, probably Looker Studio, and these kind of tools where you're able to kind of prompt using natural language and kind of get answers to different charts and kind of this is what's it's these reports that are essentially generated for you. I think it's super, super interesting, but we'll touch on this in a little bit. I'm also interested to kind of hear your view on kind of when hiring for an analytics team, what essential qualities or skills would you prioritize? Do you have any tips for kind of identifying the strong kind of candidates during the hiring process, for example?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think this also depends on where the team is at the moment you think that you need to hire, because that's really going to dictate what type of person that you're looking for. Because currently we do have an opening for an analytics engineer. And so we have received applications from a lot of new graduates or people who are kind of finishing their maybe their finance degree or their very advanced science degree. We've seen a lot of that. But what we're really looking for at this point is someone with more practical experience, someone who has worked in a transformation tool, even if it's not DBT, there are other transformation tools potentially. Someone who is very familiar with kind of data warehousing modeling. It could be like a Kimball or Eamon, like someone who actually understands these types of processes, which is really hard to do if you don't have the experience.
Absolutely. So you'd say you're kind of more at this point in time, obviously, where you are right now, you're kind of looking more, kind of focused more on the technical skills, right? Whether that's kind of around warehousing or ETL or whatever it might be. But generally speaking, do you what do you think of like the the softer side of the equation, like the soft skills or kind of problem solving abilities in an analytics team member?
Well, if you're lucky enough to make it to an interview and it goes well.
Which is no easy thing in itself, but absolutely.
Then there's like a business case, which is mostly involves data modeling in some way. So it's really about how do you think about data? Can you take this data set and can you take a business question if you have a stakeholder that wants to understand what are sales over time? Can you build a model that represents that? So you do have to try to figure out, okay, what is the business understanding of what this means? And also, not only that, like what type of trade-offs would you make if you needed to build a table that represents sales over time? Like what type of trade-offs? What are you thinking about as well? Like what kind of questions can you anticipate from your stakeholder that needs this information? And also, like, can you then communicate what you built, how you built it to the stakeholder in a really easy way for them to understand, essentially. So really,
that's not an easy skill in itself, right? That kind of communication.
Understanding what the user wants is like 99% of what you're actually going to be doing.
Exactly. And I think just to like reiterate that kind of communication or kind of trying to do it in, in layman terms, essentially. I think it's a kind of sticking point, or it can be, right? When you're then kind of presenting or trying to translate or communicate these things to the end users. I think that's where a lot of people can come unstuck, essentially, right?
That's true. You can have someone like super great technically, but they cannot talk to a business person, essentially.
Yeah,
and in some companies, that might be okay because you might have someone else in your team who's much better at the communication part.
Exactly.
Where you can team up and have that. But if you're at a smaller company, that might be a luxury.
Exactly. Absolutely. But moving on, what in terms of your role as like analytics engineer, what would you say is the single most important quality to look for in an analytics engineer? Do you have one?
Wow. The single most important quality. Oh, that's a good one.
Or what do you think your most kind of relevant or biggest quality is for the role that you're in, for example?
I think, well, I'm going to be.
You can gloat. It's okay. It's all right.
Maybe be fun should be like on the top of the list. But outside of that, you just need to be really able to think logically, really. It's really the thinking skills because you don't spend that much time actually coding something. It's really thinking about how can you translate a business question or some business process into code. And that requires you to think, to use some type of reasoning and logic. Can you reason? Do you have deductive reasoning? Those types of things. That's the most important part, is the actual thinking part, and being able to translate something that could be quite abstract at first into some tangible data set for a consumer.
Yep. No, fair enough. And moving on a little bit to this kind of last mile delivery and this kind of, this area, obviously Instabee is kind of working in this area, and it's known kind of for its, complexity, high cost as well. How does Instabee, how do you guys in your team use data analytics essentially to streamline these operations? What role does, or do these data-driven insights play in making deliveries faster, more cost-effective?
Wow. Yeah, we have actually a quite important role in the company.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what we're doing is helping to drive strategy.
Right.
And so we build a lot of reports that are used in the terminal by the terminal managers, for instance, because they want to understand like how they're performing, and if something went wrong yesterday, how can they actually improve? So we have a very wide footprint, and the complexity is in all of these different systems and all of these different data that's being generated in multiple places. Everything from the lockers to the driver app, for instance. When the driver's out on a route, they're delivering parcels.
This must be a super important and rather complex part, right? Because it's the last mile kind of delivery, and you've got this essentially all of these analytics that are going into kind of addressing route optimization, I can imagine, resource allocation, all of these things. How, this must be, like I said, it's super important. So it must be quite, you've got to get it right, basically. How do you guys work with this?
Yeah, we try to get it right. What we have to end up doing is we have to collaborate with a lot of different teams, a lot of different domains. We have, in our kind of engineering, we have tech teams that are focused on maybe a piece of technology. So we have a team that is working on the driver app. You might have a different team that actually is looking at that route optimization, like that you said, because of course that is a key part of being an efficient logistics company. And also the sorting machines. So we have a team that works with how can we sort parcels more efficiently when we get it? So we have all of these different teams that are focused on different areas. And what we're doing is trying to cross-team collaboration in a good way, so we can piece together all of these kind of disparate data points that are coming from different places, so that we can then have them in our kind of data warehouse. We model it that represents what's happening in reality in order for our kind of business people to make sense of it, so that they can understand how are we performing? Are we doing good? Are we doing bad? and how can we improve as well. So it's a lot of just running around trying to figure out who knows what and who knows where can we get this data that someone mentioned that we might have somewhere in some database somewhere.
You need access.
Precisely. So it's a lot of work. Sometimes it can be a lot of like research that we're doing, a lot of talking around to a lot of people, then talking to all business people who might understand kind of how the business processes are working, because for us, that's the important part of being able to actually make sense of the data that we model. So we need to understand how it actually works. And one of the things that we do on our team is that when you start, you actually go out to a terminal and you work in that terminal for the day. So you actually go do some parcels. You actually also go on a route. So with a driver, so a locker route, it could be also home delivery. So I've done all of that as well, done home deliveries, delivering parcels to the boxes. And it really helps you to kind of make sense of everything that's happening. And then we can go and look at the data next day and say, okay, how terrible did we do?
It makes sense. It's a really good way of doing it, actually. It kind of makes you much more kind of, I don't know, accountable in a way, or kind of like, you understand how everything pieces together in a completely different way, I can imagine. But there's also like, customer expectations. Obviously, these parcels have been delivered to someone, and there's this demand for kind of fast, delivery, flexibility as well. Kind of how does, Instabee, how do you guys, in your role balance the, you could say, competing demands, right? Speed and service and quality of service. How did the data insights kind of help you balance that? I mean, would you say that there's a compromise, quality and speed? One has to kind of be compromised somewhat.
You'd probably have to ask our head of operations.
Right.
But yeah, of course, we do quite a bit of work on looking at how our users feel about us, how are they experiencing the service. And then we can make changes as a result. And of course, we're now going into peak season, Black Friday, Christmas shopping.
Yeah. What's the environment like then? Like, is everyone super stressed, or like, a
little bit?
Yeah, I can imagine. So we got to get this right.
Yeah, we got to get this right.
Because you got that knock-on effect as well, right? If you mess like one part of a day or one day up, it kind of has that real knock-on effect. And what do? You just add more delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. Where if I believe maybe it was earlier this year, we had like a somewhere up north where it like snowed like really a lot. And so nobody got any parcels that day.
Yeah. I mean, you can only do what's within your, work on or kind of manage what's within your control, right?
True, but sometimes customers don't think so.
No, exactly. Yeah, they're not thinking in those terms, right? No. Absolutely right. It's not easy, right?
No, but I think the key is like, what do your customers expect?
Yeah.
And I think that's true of any business. It's not just a logistic, that's something for logistics for any company as well. Like, are you meeting the expectations of your customers?
Yeah, so let's get your take, Anita, also on data governance and security and analytics, right? How do you ensure data integrity and compliance in your work?
Yeah, that's something that we have like top of mind, and making sure that we have like processes in place where we have PII data kind of hidden away, that not everyone has access controls. And what we actually have been working on now is kind of how do we actually increase this data governance? And it usually comes into play when you're in a startup that has like significant growth. No one thinks about data governance at all. until you reach a certain point where actually this is going to be an issue. We should put some processes in place now.
Or you have some kind of clients coming in that start asking those questions more and more, and you're like, we should start thinking about this.
So we've done a lot of work making sure in what we can do, like within DBT itself, is really amazing because we can mask data, we can hash, for instance, like a user email address, because we need a lot of customer information in order to deliver parcels. That's captured, but we don't need to have it in the data warehouse for people to access. So we can do a lot of that masking and data governance in DBT, and also and more control now we have Snowflake, and we're on Enterprise, which allows us now to be able to actually have a really nice governance layer, row-level access controls and things like that. And also making sure people don't have access to what they don't need as well. And so that's like a continuous thing for us, is to make sure that we are completely compliant with kind of making sure that we're not doing anything a bit, dodgy with people's data.
No, exactly. And I think it's a good point that you make. A lot of these tools, you mentioned Snowflake, I mentioned BigQuery earlier. There's a lot of kind of security layers that come with certain versions of these tools, at least, right?
Yes.
So no, that's a very, very good point. And in your experience, not just in the team that you're working in at the moment, but in your experience, when it comes to kind of KPIs that you focus on in your projects, how do you determine which metrics matter most?
For us in the team or for the company?
For you guys in the team.
Yeah, we actually had an exercise this year where we tried to define some team KPIs. And so we did one pass through and we all were like, yeah, that sounds good. And then when we revisited later at another session, we were like, these are terrible.
Why were they terrible?
I think it was such a new exercise for us to try to figure out what is a good KPI for a data team. And I think you need some type of external help with that. Like you need to have maybe some feedback from external stakeholders, or maybe do some surveys, and to try to understand like what really is the impact of a data team. I think that's really, really hard. I think it's always has been hard, or will probably continue to be hard as well. Because
and what KPIs were you give us some examples here of what you came up with?
We came up with like percentage uptime for our data, like which is currently at 99%. So it sounds great.
Nearly there. Nice.
But at the same time, we were like, okay, well, how can we calculate our impact besides like obvious kind of KPIs where we might consider, well, is this a vanity metric that we really are looking at, or is this something that, well, this is our target, can we improve on this target essentially? So that was one instance where we were like, yeah, this is no good. Maybe we shouldn't say that part as our key KPI. And then we kind of landed on a few others that were more in our control, like how can we explore and implement a data catalog, for instance, like within the next 6 months or something like that.
Nice.
Which is a nice goal to have, because it's a project and it's something you can implement, quantify as well, and also measure impact, because you can measure impact by the stakeholders. Are they using this thing? Are they getting value out of something that we can actually help implement? And that's what we want to really focus on. Like, how can we show more value as a team data? Because it's quite hard currently to do that.
Yeah, makes sense. And moving on a little bit to kind of future and trends, and And these areas, I mean, obviously with AI and machine learning, lots and lots happening, in the field. Do you see certain aspects of analytics engineering becoming automated that hasn't already been? What role essentially do you will analytics engineers play in the future in these data teams?
Yeah, you're still going to need people. It's my
Right. Yeah.
There's no robot coming for our jobs.
A human's still the pilot, right?
Because you still need someone to make sense of the data and make those connections.
Yep.
And a computer can't do that unless you tell it to. And we actually, at some point, we did try a tool like a text. It was a tool where it was AI where it could generate different data from tables in the data warehouse, but then it would join on the wrong keys, for instance.
Right.
And things like that. And then, of course, if you're joining on the wrong keys, you're not getting any correct data.
Yeah, you're screwed from the start, right?
You are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, actually, there's still going to be a need for people in these roles because you still need a person to actually make sense of some process or something that's happening in the real world and translating it to data. It's really hard for a computer to do that by itself. And also,
I was just going to say you have this kind of the need for the strategigoing oversight, not just like the governance and the these checks that need to be made as well, but the strategic oversight is super important here as well. So I can agree. There's going to that human element is certainly not going to disappear. But talking about trends specifically, trends in data analytics, what are you most excited about? Anything in particular?
Well, we were at the Snowflake event a few weeks ago, and
tell us everything.
They have this annual world tour, and I was sitting in on a talk on Cortex Analysts. And that actually seemed really quite interesting because it's really hard to kind of stay on top of like all of the different kind of improvements and all the new things that are out there. And I think the future will probably be a lot more kind of new flashy things being shoved in your face, but it's kind of really hard to try to figure out, okay, what's actually really relevant for me? But I was pretty excited at Cortex Analysts because it really looked like it worked really well. But we'll see.
And how does it work? What is it? Yeah. What is it for my sake?
So Cortex Analysts is like this really cool. It is more kind of AI within Snowflake.
Got you.
And you can create like analysis, and they have these really cool features where now you can actually create like a kind of like a Jupyter notebook within your kind of Snowflake environment and create visuals along with your code. So you can have like a chart and then your code and then another chart, kind of creating more of a workflow rather than what we're using now as a kind of a code editor for our just querying our SQL tables. That's apparently it. But making it as part of a workflow and also having this kind of AI layer that we could potentially plug in as well. So we'll see. I'm not holding my breath just yet. We'll see how it works. Usually when you first try out some new AI tool, it doesn't work that great.
Are you some of the early users of it? The first kind of users?
Not yet.
No. Okay.
But we'll see.
Fair enough. And rounding off a little bit here, what advice? I'm after a little bit of advice for those listening. Essentially, what advice would you give to individuals looking to pursue a career in data analytics?
Oh well, yeah. I think my main advice is number one: why? Why do you want to be a data analyst? And number two, are you ready to work hard? Because it is more than simply being able to write some code. It is a combination of not only the technical that you do need to master, but it's a combination of, can you translate kind of business requirements? Can you speak to different stakeholders? Can you really understand what it is they want? And then can you think critically about data as well? Because in my experience, business users think they know what they want, but they really don't know what they want.
No.
So can you get that information and then translate it to something that might work with the data that you have? Or maybe it doesn't work because maybe there is no data that we have that could answer a specific question. But I think for new people who are joining, it's really hard because the market is flooded. But I think the more practical experience that you have really helps. Actual experience with the tools itself. It could be Snowflake, it could be BigQuery, dbt, it could be GCP, AWS. It really doesn't matter. As long as you gain some practical experience, some projects that you've worked on that do translate to solving a business problem. That's the key kind of aspect, because hiring managers aren't going to take you seriously without that kind of practical experience, because a lot of companies don't have the infrastructure to take on people who are at the very beginning of their career because they need a lot of mentoring, they need some hand holding. And so they might want you to hit the ground running. And so having kind of built projects that are similar to what a company might be looking for in a prospect is the key
that
thing.
Are at least kind of translatable, right? Or transferable as well.
It needs to be
but
translated.
This kind of, exactly. But this, this as much kind of practical experience as possible obviously can be hard for those kind of just getting started. And you mentioned kind of experience of these tools, these platforms like Snowflake and BigQuery. Obviously, this assumes kind of an ability or kind of those foundational skills like SQL, right, or data modeling that these people need to learn first. Would you say that it's a much better idea to have these foundational skills in place before you hop straight into these tools like Snowflake and BigQuery? Right?
I think you could learn them in parallel, actually.
Yeah,
I think it's if you could optimize that process and be more efficient. Because I think it's really sometimes really hard with the theoretical if you do the theoretical first and then the practical. But sometimes you can just get started with the practical and then just learn the theoretical as you go along. I think that could work for most people, actually. But it also depends on how people learn. So some people learn a bit differently. But I think it's a crowded market, so you have to figure out a way to stand out. The way to stand out is basically, can you solve a business problem, and can you showcase that and get in front of a hiring manager that might want to, that needs a person just like you.
Very good advice. And Anita, is there anything you'd like to add here before I wrap up?
Oh, wow. Just in general, or?
Just in general, yeah.
I'm like super, like really happy with kind of my career, how it's gone, where I've landed. And I think for some people, it could be like really a great career path if you're willing to put in the work. And it's not always fun or glamorous. Sometimes it can be quite tough as well. And you have to take the good and the bad aspects of the job. And it is not only technical, but it's communication as well. But you still need to be good at the technical stuff. I tell people all the time. And also, and just understanding data. Like, do you have an intuition about data, how it works? And can you pay attention to all those tiny details as well?
Super. Good advice again. And thank you. This brings us to the end of this episode. Anita, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your insights and your experiences. It's been really, really interesting to hear your perspectives on data, all things data. And I hope our listeners have also found this to be an interesting listen. So thanks so much. We really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
I agree. And yeah, thanks also to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, keep innovating and keep building. We'll see you soon.